We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
Hunter Biden causes uproar by not appearing for a closed-door deposition. Now, what does that mean for Hunter Biden? What does it mean for Congress? And what does it mean for Joe Biden's chances of escaping an impeachment inquiry? Well, we're very fortunate to have with us today Mr. Scott D. Cosenza, Liberty Nation's legal affairs editor and host of the Most Excellent Uprising podcast. Welcome aboard, Scott.
Hi, Mark. Pleasure to be here.
Now, Scott, we're recording this on the day, literally minutes after Hunter Biden turned up at the Capitol building, due at 9:30 on Wednesday. And instead of going into the building, he stood on the steps and said, "I'm here to give a public testimony," rather than the closed-door testimony for which he was subpoenaed, and then got in a car and drove off, surrounded by Secret Service agents. Now, Scott, correct me if I'm wrong, because I'm not a lawyer, as everybody knows who listens to this show. I wasn't aware that you could pick and choose how you get subpoenaed.
There's a great scene in The Wire, the fantastic serial by David Simon, where a person says something legalistic and this attorney says, "Well, you're not a lawyer." And he says, "Why would somebody pretend to be a lawyer who wasn't?" Like, it was the most vile. I always just stuck with me as a good anti-lawyer joke. So I appreciate that. Yes, Mark, in a normal course of events for legal proceedings, one doesn't get to choose these things, except to say that in civil litigation, there are accommodations made. So if you say, "Oh, I can't get to, the place before noon," or Tuesday's better than Wednesday, these sorts of things are typical. But the idea that you would be able to dictate as the subject of a deposition, especially a kind of hostile one, if we can say that.
I would say it was hostile. I mean, Hunter Biden
Yeah.
was talking about how MAGA Republicans are shameless.
Yeah.
I would say that was pretty hostile.
The thing is about Hunter, he's totally a political actor in this sense, I think, right? He's trying to help out his father's political fortunes, but also in some way, you could say that he's trying to help himself out. What I mean by that is Hunter Biden is charged with crimes that amount to over 40 years worth of imprisonment if he were to be convicted of them. He's currently facing those federal charges. So anything he says has to be with a mind's eye, I think, towards protecting his own interests to not being put in a cage.
Of course. Yeah. I mean, that's got to be the thing at the forefront, or as Joe Biden likes to say, and nobody else in the entire world says until Joe Biden says it, top of mind.
Let me add this, Mark, and
Sure.
I love that you are rejecting the notion that this is a British phrase that has somehow been imported to America.
Absolutely not.
I want you to lead the charge on that, to continue to. So I appreciate that. But and now I've lost my train of thought entirely. So anyway, I was going to say this. Excuse me. I recovered it. It's hard to imagine, strictly speaking, from the criminal liability perspective, why any attorney would allow Hunter Biden to go and appear and give testimony.
Yes.
Because testimony generally, the line is, every American TV watcher probably knows it by heart, that you have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you. And this part isn't a part of the phrase, Mark, but it should be included, and it cannot be used to help you. What I mean by that is a self-serving statement that a person makes often cannot be introduced in court because that is inadmissible under the hearsay rules. But a statement that incriminates you is an exception to the hearsay rule. So that's why, that's sort of like peeling the onion a little bit, a layer deeper too, is that's the reason why it will be used against you.
We need to hunt down this lady called Miranda who wrote these rights.
Uh-huh.
Now, let's talk specifically about what this means for Hunter Biden. Yes, we're all agreed that it's in his best interest not to testify. I get that. But people aren't afforded that option, are they? When they're subpoenaed, they're usually not afforded the option, hey, you know what? It's better if I don't testify. It's better for me if I don't testify. So is that okay?
I'll tell you what. This is a good road to go down, because what would happen without the political feature of this drama, okay? If it weren't about electoral politics and power politics, it was just about the criminal charges, what would happen is Hunter Biden would be called and he would assert his right to remain silent, his Fifth Amendment right to be silent, that anything he said
Can
tended
and
to
will be used.
incriminate himself. And
Yeah.
I imagine that is a feature that Republicans are desirous of having to play on their election ads, and that Democrats are not. And so there's sort of this other element that's painting, coloring all the proceedings. There's another thing too, Mark, that I just want to make sure that we talk about while we're talking about Hunter Biden, because while I'm not generally sympathetic to Mr. Biden, the younger, he is being set upon by prosecutors in a way that I think is totally unacceptable, and a lesson for all of us. Just as with Donald Trump's prosecution, in terms of, it was okay for prosecutors if Hunter Biden never served one single day in jail if he pled guilty to the charges that they were offering him. And then when things went off the rails with that plea agreement, now he's going to make them prove their charges in court, right? He's going to go to trial on these criminal charges. Well, now the prosecutors say he should be convicted of crimes where it's appropriate to put him in prison for 42 years. At least 42, I think, was the latest one I saw of somebody who did the math on it. Now, in what society is it just for a person to either get no days in prison or 42 years in prison, depending upon whether they say, yes, I did it, or no, I didn't do it? I think that is...
Well, I think the real issue there, Scott, is not that these are the broad array of options open to litigants and defendants. It's rather that on one side, you had a Department of Justice that was actively trying to help and mitigate and limit any damage that the younger Biden was facing. And then once that was exposed, they had to say, well, we've got to try and treat you like we treat everybody else instead, which is the 42-year, up to 42-year limit. So I don't think it's a question of that. Yes, certainly Hunter Biden is the piggy in the middle, as we call it, or the tennis ball on the court being whacked backwards and forwards by the two sides. But to say that this is the scope of the scope of the punishment available to a normal litigant isn't quite right, because a normal defendant, because a normal defendant wouldn't have the Justice Department and the White House going to bat for him to try and limit those down to 0 days in jail.
You could be confused for being a lawyer after that explanation. It was very good, and I appreciate it. But I'm going to turn it around on you and say this. The reason why you're wrong about that is, the reason why he is just like any other defendant is because it depends on the political view of his crime. And so what I mean by that is, if you are a junkie who held up a pharmacy and stole some opioids, you're treated one way, perhaps. And if you're the wife of a senator who finagled a prescription feloniously and illegally to feed your own addiction as another, well, one of those persons might get stomped on by the justice system, while the other one gets basically a pass. Those are the political choices that I think, they're the discretion, boy.
Well, that's the thing, right? As you've told me time and time again on this here radio show, the decision to prosecute is always political, which brings me to a very, very important question. Hunter Biden has taken upon himself, presumably with under the advice of his lawyer, Abby Lowell, one of the Boston Lowells, perhaps, I don't know, to not attend the deposition for which he was subpoenaed. Now, does that mean,
or the political staff? By the way, that's the thing. You don't know who's directing these.
Sure. That's. I mean, I believe that Eric Swalwell was standing literally alongside Hunter Biden. I believe that's the case.
I don't think he's on the legal team.
Well, yeah. But he's possibly the worst optics to have there if that were the case. Now, so what decision is now left to the chairs of the House Oversight and Judiciary Committee? Because
Mark,
they subpoenaed him, and so now they are left with a choice to hold him in contempt of Congress, right?
Yeah. So what they can do is they can say you're in contempt for. They would vote on it, right? That requires another vote. It's not like if you don't comply with the subpoena, some clerk hits a button and you're automatically in that state. They'd have to vote on it.
Sure.
And then The Department of Justice, then President Joseph R. Biden Jr.'s appointee, Merrick Garland, would have to direct his seconds and deputies at the Department of Justice to haul young Mr. Biden before the court and bring him to justice. And of course, I went through all that ridiculous discussion because it's ridiculous to suggest that would ever happen. I don't think that it will.
You know what, Scott? I'm gonna disagree with you, not from
Okay.
the legal angle, but from the political angle. What wonderful optics it would be for President Joe Biden to say, look at this. They're dragging my son into here. They've sent people to arrest my son for what? And they've dragged him there, and he's just going to sit there and say, I have no comment. I have no comment. I have no comment. I reserve my right to plead the Fifth Amendment. But Joe Biden will have this field day, or at least not Joe Biden, but his surrogates will have the field day of saying, look, they've arrested the president's son. Isn't this terrible? They're not going after the president. They're going after the president's son. That's a political win.
We'll see.
We'll see. Scott DeCosenza, thanks ever so much for joining us. We'll be right back with Scott DeCosenza after this short break. Don't go anywhere. We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
Don't get caught up in the media madness. Join our movement for free thinking and free speech at libertynation.com. Publishing news and analysis 24/7 with original articles by our team of authors who tell it like it is. Join us each week for online TV shows, The Uprising Podcast, and Liberty Nation Radio. We believe in free thinking and free speech. We are libertynation.com.